So, very awkwardly, it tells me very loudly that this recording is started. Welcome, everyone, to our first ever One Voice Brevard 2026 legislative session recap. Basically, we wanted to take a look at what happened this last legislative session in Florida, but with a more specific disability focused lens. We are getting ready to enter conversations specifically about the budget. It was just announced in our state that special session will not be happening next week for the budget. They are set to head back to Tallahassee, I believe, on the 20th for
Mhm.
conversations surrounding redistricting. However, the official schedule for the budget has not been published yet, so we still have some time to make phone calls, to engage with legislators, and talk about our personal priorities from the disability community in our state. On our panel tonight, I'm super, super excited to have so many amazing people. I'm going to start Hollywood Square style for how I see it in my computer, but to my left, I see the amazing advocate JJ Holmes. We're going to come back and let everybody, do a quick hello. Uh, Down this way, I see Laura Lee Minutello from Disability Rights Florida. Beneath me, the amazing Jim DeBogren. I'm going to say the Florida Developmental Disability Council, but I know that you wear many, many hats. So I'm going to let you talk about that in a minute. And then, I'm so sorry, one more time. Dila, right? Did I say that? Yes.
You got it.
From the ACLU. I think you also wear a couple of hats, don't you? It's not just the ACLU?
No, I think that's the only hat that I'm aware of, at least.
Okay, I just know that usually in our world, people wear a lot of different hats. So I can start with you, sir, if you would like to talk to us about what you do and the work that you do in the ACLU.
Sure. So this is Abdillah speaking. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a brown man wearing glasses with a beard and short hair. My name is Abdillah Skier, as Nicole said. I'm a senior campaign strategist at the ACLU of Florida. And in my role, I help design and implement our advocacy campaigns. So at the American Civil Liberties Union, for those who don't know, is one of the country's oldest civil rights organizations that has our mission is to promote, defend, advance, and protect the constitutional rights and civil liberties of all people in this country that are guaranteed under the Constitution. And yeah, I'm based in Tallahassee. Was that it? Just an introduction, or did you
No,
want
that's
me, us
perfect.
to?
I
Okay,
think it's
perfect.
really timely considering we just celebrated the anniversary, right, of the sit-in for 504. So we're talking about, a lot of fantastic anniversaries this year for sure. Next, I'd like to welcome Jim DeBogren, if you would like to give us a brief introduction, sir.
Sure, I'm Jim DeBogren. I'm also in Tallahassee, and I actually have my own business. I do consulting, some legislative advocacy type work. I am also a family member of a person who was served. He unfortunately passed away a few years back. Also, I worked in the House Appropriations Committee for 20 years, and I also served as the executive director of the Florida Agency for Persons with Disabilities under Governor Christ, and then briefly under Governor Scott. And I'm out of Tallahassee, like I said, but I am coming to you today from Music City, USA, Nashville, Tennessee. And again, I will apologize in advance if the hotel internet cuts me off somehow. But I'm happy to be here and love Brevard County.
Thank you very much. Appreciate again you taking the time. I know that you are very busy. Another very busy person, Laura, from Disability Rights Florida. I'll let you do your introduction.
Hi everyone, I'm Laura Minutello or Laura Lee, either one works. And I am the Senior Public Policy Analyst at Disability Rights Florida, which is the state's designated protection and advocacy agency. There is one of us, one of our counterparts in every state and territory, and we exist to advance and the rights of people with disabilities through um, free legal and advocacy services. I am also a person with a disability. I have cerebral palsy, so kind of wear those uh, both personal and professional hats. And I'm also coming from Tallahassee. I think, Nicole, we might be getting some of the weather that y'all are having too. So hopefully we don't have internet problems. But just for a quick visual description, I'm Italian appearing and currently have a sort of black flowery top and colorful disability rates Florida background and use she, her pronouns.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. All of our friends from Tallahassee. I'm particularly pleased also to introduce another panelist here who's a good friend of mine and definitely someone I wanted like to be when I grow up. His name is JJ Holmes. JJ, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name's JJ Holmes. I live in Central Florida. And as you may have guessed, I'm disabled. I'm 22 years old. I'm a disability advocate and also a college student. Thank you, Nicole, for organizing this.
Thank you very much, JJ. And finally, I am Nicole Grabner. I am the director for One Voice Brevard. I am the president of the One Voice Coalition of Florida. And I guess I could say that I use she, her pronouns. I have brown hair, wear glasses, and wearing a black top this evening. I am a self-advocate as I am a disabled veteran and I'm a mother of two children on the spectrum. So I would say in that regard, disability is incredibly prevalent as a conversation in our home. Um, I wanted in particular to put this panel together to hopefully have a conversation focused on disability legislation and advocacy topics. We had a lot of conversations that came from our session that just closed down in March, and there's going to be a lot more conversations coming forward. I know that in particular, currently there's talks around redistricting, there's talks about millage, there's talks about our taxes and voting. But I'd seen nowhere where we could have the focus, the lens that took all of this information with just that focus for disability issues. For people with disabilities in our community, it touches everything. I think everyone can understand and appreciate that disability stretches into every area of advocacy. It is also that area of advocacy that I feel is incredibly nonpartisan. It is not something that is ever just Democratic or Republican or anything of that nature. It is nonpartisan and it affects 1 in 4 people in our country to this day. So if you have no personal connection to disability, I suspect at one point you will someday very soon. And so, as a part of this conversation, we hope to empower our families to engage with legislators to hopefully, advocate for the things that they are hoping for in the next year, especially as we get ready for conversations around the budget. But to begin, I'd like to go back just a little bit further and talk about a couple of things that happened in session, during session. So we wanted, as we were trying to put this panel together, to figure out, kind of the focus here. So we talked about wins, bills that we think, that made it through that we were excited about, bills that we were excited about that didn't make it through, so some of our losses, and then maybe some bills that made it through that we are not so excited about. So I'd like to start, if that's okay, with bills that were wins, and then we can kind of maybe go through that way. So, Jim, did you want to start us off with a couple of bills that you thought were some good wins this year? Oh, I think you're muted. Sorry.
Yes, thank you. Sorry about that. Um, there were, it was kind of a quiet, in my opinion, compared to previous sessions. It was kind of a quiet session, but there were a couple of bills that I think were kind of exciting, and one of them, to me, uh, the one that I'm happiest about, and I'm sure that I know that Laura and also Sarah Goldman, who is our public policy chair with the DD Council. I know they work very hard on this. And this has been something that's been near and dear to my heart for literally over a decade. And that was House Bill 915 by Allison Tant. Uh, Senator Bradley sponsored the Senate companion to that, and it codifies what was supposedly already policy that first got adopted in the 2019-20 budget. And this allows people with intellectual developmental disability who work to earn up to 550% of what they would otherwise be able to earn and maintain their eligibility for Medicaid. And that one was, again, even though it was already the policy, and I think Laura can probably explain better than I can some of the issues that not having that in statute was causing. So that took care of that. There was also, I'm going to mention one other because I suspect there's some other bills that I want to make sure that other people have a chance to highlight other bills, but there was a bill by Representative Gossett Seidman from Palm Beach County, House Bill 453, the Senate companion 556 by Senator Berman, also from Palm Beach County, and that allows participation in Special Olympics to substitute for the PE credit required for graduation. I was actually surprised how much the stakeholder community embraced that bill, and it passed. So that was a bright point. Again, there wasn't any systemic reform legislation, but there were a couple of little nuggets that I think move us forward, and then there were a few disappointments as well. So I'll pass it along. I know some others have some things that they would like to highlight as well.
Thanks. I kind of wanted to echo both of those. I'm glad you brought up for Special Olympics because I know that the bill encompassed more than that. For 453, they talked about, I think, marching band as well, right?
Yep. Yeah,
And
that got
so,
amended onto the bill. It got amended onto the bill there towards the and at one of the committee stops. Yep.
yeah, so I think that it was worth mentioning for sure that, a lot of, like you said, that effort from, stakeholders, a lot of testimony, a lot of support for that bill. So that was really exciting. Laura, he brought up 915, and I know he specifically mentioned 500% of poverty level. Maybe for some people who don't understand what that means, as far as a salary, what does that look like? Because when you talk, especially, I know there's a lot. And there was in particular a couple of bills this session that talked about Medicaid and working requirements. So perhaps could you give us some context about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as Jim kind of said, this was a piece of proviso that had been in proviso since 2018, but this with the official codification and codifying those requirements such as the 550%, that is roughly about $65,000, up to $65,000. You don't have to make that. That's something that I want to clarify for folks. So if you're on the waiver, it covers currently, it covers all of the Medicaid waiver programs. So whether that is the long-term care, whether it's the iBudget, CDC Plus, the pilot program, you don't have to make that much. But if you are working, you're able to make that much, as well as a updated savings limit of $13,000. And then there are also uh things that you can do as far as putting extra money in trust if that, you exceed your assets exceed those limits. It also specifies a retirement account so that you can save for retirement. So, kind of when we think about the ability for people with disabilities to work, that is one of the, to your point, Nicole, that is a big struggle in maintaining those requirements, in as far as Medicaid eligibility. But I do want to your point, just reiterate the fact that, like, even if you are employed at a much lower salary or low, part-time, very part-time, those are still available to you. You still have the ability to save. And as a person with a disability, just, for that context, it's not only the meaningfulness of work, right? But it's that ability to save if things happen, and so I think one of the things that I want to highlight for working people as well, it has been a 8-year kind of journey to have that codified. And as Jim said, some of the issues that we were seeing were that this program was in proviso, but DCF staff really didn't know about it. Nobody else knew about it. So what we're hoping is that as more people are able to take advantage of it, more people are able to get into the workforce better. We want to live as people with disabilities. We want to live as full lives as possible. And that isn't to say, don't hear that as you have to work to live a full life. That is absolutely not true. But for those of us that are able, to have those avenues, that is very important. It is also important as we're looking to the work to be done, to use this as proof of concept so that more folks with disabilities can have easier access to the Medicaid services that they need. So, and especially, Nicole, to your point, as we're seeing, work requirements and things like that, we want to make sure that ultimately, Florida is one of 3 states without a Medicaid buy-in program, which would open this all up to all people with disabilities. So that is kind of a preview of the work to be done, but certainly we want to celebrate working people.
No, I think that's fantastic. I also feel like it's a timely conversation, right? Because I feel like there was a couple of news outlets that just reported the rising increased rates of just the cost of living in our state. So it's probably worth acknowledging, at least right now, that, as the costs increase, and we're not just talking about, medical, because I mean, that's a whole different conversation, right? Like for our medical, especially for anybody with complex medical needs, but, just groceries, gas,
Yeah.
rent, any of these things that to allow you to live and fully, be included into your community. This is a time that those costs you just keep rising. So, I appreciate you saying that. So thank you.
And I think too, like, I know the heart behind this. The original proviso also was like, I think to JJ, you're a lot younger than I am, and I hope that this makes it easier for the next JJs in the world and the next Floras that can come and know that they have the option to work, because I didn't know that when I was it wasn't available to me when I was JJ's age. I did want to highlight one other bill real quick, and then I will pass it along. But the law enforcement training was another piece that we were very excited to see passed, and that was sponsored by Rep Valdez and Rep or Senator Nicole. Help me out. I'm just blanking.
Hold on. I can.
Thank you, Jim. Sorry, I was just like going back to my notes here. Hold on, sorry.
Valdez, Jones, Chevron Jones.
Yeah, Jones. Yeah, sorry.
It's already so, but
it's a Wednesday evening.
Yes. Jones. Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Nicole. So this is very important because it's the first time that we're really seeing um, dedicated law enforcement training that is going to be given to everybody as they're coming out of the various training academies. And that, and not out of a tragedy either. And so the last time something was kind of done around this was 2018 or so, after Ronaldo Rio Soto and that tragedy. But to have something, and you were speaking about grassroots support earlier, this is something that the Autism Society Greater Orlando and DRF, a lot of other advocates. I saw a lot of testimony from law enforcement, from parents, from just advocates that were able to make this happen. So that was definitely a win. It's another area where I think from a DRF perspective, we would like to see more of this, and more training as far as autism. We know that the interactions cross disability with law enforcement, there needs to be cross disability training, but certainly a win. And I want to give JJ and others opportunity to talk as well, but I wanted to highlight that briefly.
No, I agree with you. I think, it's also worth mentioning because a lot of people may not understand the time because, policy, right, is not a sprint activity. This is the long distance. Jim mentioned a decade for the Working People with Disabilities bill. And now for this law enforcement, I'd have to ask, the Autism Society of Greater Orlando, but I think it's been at least over 6 or 7 years that they've been trying
Yeah,
to get
it's
something like this codified. So, for those who don't know, that's Senate Bill 418, House Bill 365. I'll try to put some of this information in our show notes as well, so you can have links to the bills that we're talking about this evening. But yes, thank you for bringing that one up. I know that there's a lot of conversation about first responders in general as far as working with our population. A lot of discussion happens with autism, but I noticed that there is a lot of crossover for our population with dementia or Alzheimer's, that a lot of this can be broadened to be inclusive for not just one, and I noticed that for all disabilities. Like usually what's good for one is good for everybody. But to have that understanding with, someone with complex medical or complex disabilities or anything of that nature, just having more conversations, like Laura said, like to broaden that, because I think this is the great foot in the door that hopefully can continue to grow. JJ, did you have something that for a bill that you were wanting to talk about?
So I've got two good bills, but neither of them passed. Although the first one, technically, had zero direct impact on me. It was SB 206, and specifically the part that would have updated Florida's definition of autism. A definition that hasn't changed in decades. But then, it got dropped. Now you might be thinking, JJ, you have cerebral palsy. Why do you care about autism policy? Fair question. Because today it's autism that has to fight for its survival. Next year it could be cerebral palsy, or Down syndrome, or spina bifida. And once you start deciding which disabilities are current enough or convenient enough to define properly, you're not really making a medical decision anymore. You're making a budget decision. Because APD eligibility and definitions determine who gets services and who gets left out. And that's exactly why something like updating the definition of autism matters, even if it doesn't affect you personally. Because when the legislators start quietly ignoring definitions, they're not just affecting one group. They're testing how much they can get away with on all of us. And if we don't speak up when it's someone else's diagnosis on the line, We shouldn't be surprised when no one speaks up when it's ours. Another good bill that somehow managed to go nowhere is the right to repair bill for power wheelchairs. Well, to be fair, it didn't go nowhere. It did great in the House. All 140 members looked at it and said, yeah, that seems reasonable. But then it got to the Senate, where it keeps stalling out. Not because people are against it, but because it only really takes one person to stop it. One concern I heard is that wheelchairs are medical equipment, and we don't want people working on medical equipment, which puts it in the same category as a home dialysis machine. Except, no one looks at me sitting in my wheelchair and thinks, wow, there goes a piece of medical equipment. And, more importantly, if your dialysis machine breaks, you are not being told, great news, we can get someone out there in 6 to 8 months to fix it. But we are. So we've taken something people rely on every single day to move, to work, to exist in the world, and we've put it in a system where you're not allowed to fix it, and you're not allowed to get it fixed quickly. For something that literally replaces your ability to walk. This is a great bill. It's not controversial. It's not partisan. It's just kind of keeps getting stuck in the Senate. Senator Smith is sponsoring it again next session, so I'm hopeful third time will be the charm. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, JJ. Yeah, just to go through a bit of what he mentioned. So the SB 586, HB 47, the right to repair bill. As he mentioned, it cleared the House, but it stalled in the Senate. So I'm grateful to hear that Senator Smith is going to take it next session. So hopefully we can lay some groundwork over the summer to hopefully help pass that this year or next year, excuse me. He mentioned the autism definition bill. So for those who aren't familiar, this was a passion project of mine. It was House Bill 411. When it was filed, initially we called it Sienna's Chance after my daughter. So this bill sought to update the legal definition of autism in Florida statute. And for those who are unfamiliar, in each agency has a different definition. Department of Health, APD, every single agency, Department of Education has a different definition of what autism is, and most of them are over 30 years old. So we saw one particular statute to try to update, and that's the one that we focused on. It didn't work this year, but we're hopeful again that we can do it next year. We'll see what happens. But I appreciate JJ bringing that up, and I really am hopeful I'm not crying right now because that was very personal for me. So thank you for talking about that, JJ. And then SB 206. So we talked about that one as well. I'd like to go ahead and give Abdelia the opportunity to talk about bills that you were looking at this year.
Sure, thanks. As Laura mentioned earlier, SB 418, that was a really good bill that passed. It's a start. There's a lot to do, especially when it comes to law enforcement interacting with people with disabilities, but it is good to notch a win, right? And I'm sorry, I can't remember if Laura mentioned the SNAP and Medicaid bill, but I have it here on my notes that I was going to go over
I
it.
think that would be great to
Okay.
we didn't really cover. Nicole mentioned it briefly, but I think it'd be
Okay.
great.
Yeah. No worries. I heard you say work requirements, and so my ears perked up.
Yeah,
But
we were going to come back to that one when we talked about those bills that we were not super excited about.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in our line of work, a lot of times a win is when a bad bill fails, right? So this was a really bad bill. It would have made huge cuts to SNAP and Medicaid, which is a lifeline for low-income people and people with disabilities. These bills went way beyond what the harmful federal bill HR 1 last year did. to access to healthcare and food for low-income people. The Senate's bill went even further in its effort to kick people off Medicaid by adding work reporting requirements in a state that has not expanded this vital safety net program. So both of the bills were different, and they ended up failing, which again is a good thing because these were really bad bills. Again, a win here is that this bill didn't pass Senate Bill 1756, which was the anti-vax Surgeon General's bill. We live in a world where the state's Surgeon General is comparing public health efforts like vaccine requirements to slavery. Meanwhile, measles is on the rise due to low vaccination rates. So the Senate took what the governor and anti-vax families had been demanding to end all childhood vaccination requirements. They took it down a few notches, but it still had an overall negative impact to public health. And fortunately, this bill didn't move at all in the House. So this bill also failed to pass. Another bill that ultimately did not pass, that we had huge free speech concerns around, was House Bill 1071. It was an education bill, and there was a provision in it that would have prohibited schools from using any funds towards organizations that, quote, discriminate, which is not a well-defined definition, engaged in political advocacy or advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm not sure that politicians realize this, but disability access is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So when you attack diversity initiatives, you're attacking disability advocacy. So there were huge free speech concerns around that because, as the Supreme Court has said multiple times, children don't give up their rights to free speech when they enter the school. So we are glad that that one also failed. And then one last thing here on my notes that I had was the property tax proposals that ended up not passing because it's interesting. This is one of those concepts where politicians have their big speeches about cutting property taxes, but a lot of folks don't realize that that would be absolutely devastating to local governments, whether it's city or county governments. And those are the levels of government that touch your lives every single day of your life. And without those funds, a lot of important programs that affect your daily lives would be cut. So luckily, or fortunately rather, those proposals ended up not passing.
Oh, thank you. That's great. Yeah, I'm glad that you brought those ones up. I wanted to maybe tack on just a couple that, that I had been watching as well. I agree with Jim when he said this session felt a little bit slower than previous sessions in that, I didn't feel like we had, these big advocacy moments that we were hoping for. There was a couple of bills that I was rooting for that I didn't see move as well, but in particular, I would say the first one that maybe we didn't talk about before was drowning prevention. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the swimming lesson vouchers. Um, I don't want to bring constantly back a conversation back to autism, but we talk about for children who are at risk for elopement and drowning. As I'm not as familiar with the statistic. If Stacy was on this call with me, she would tell me right off the top of her hat. But it's, I think, the number one cause of death for children with autism, and I think Florida leads the country in the statistics for that. So this was a good win that we were rooting for. I was wishing for more from that because there was a couple of bills that talked about like legislation surrounding rental properties, conversations about different ways that they could do first responder training within drowning prevention that I didn't see move, but in this other one it did. Also, I don't know if it was discussed enough, but there was actually a couple of bills that focused on oral health care. And maybe that's not as popular of a conversation as some of the others, but I felt it was worth mentioning that there were a lot of fights happening for access to oral health care. There was one bill that talked about, it was Senate Bill 1640, House Bill 1507, and this was the Medicaid dental pilot program for people with disabilities. For those who aren't familiar, for Medicaid, they only cover, I think it's extractions and then one set of dentures. They don't cover things like cleanings. They don't do any preventative coverage. And so that was really disturbing to learn about. So we go up to kind of talk about this was supposed to be a pilot program, I think, for Central Florida. I might be wrong on that, but it was going to be like a 3-year pilot to prove that, financially it's always cheaper to pay for prevention than it is for emergency services. And in particular, for the population with intellectual developmental disabilities, we don't have enough supports or providers in the space that are familiar with our population because so often the first stop is general sedation to get access to any kind of oral health care. And so, I was hoping for more conversations around oral healthcare access. How can we do this better for our families? And so I'm hoping as we move forward over the summer that that's something that we can look at again, next session. So I just thought that that was something to discuss along with like the student elopement bill. That was Senate Bill 494 and House Bill 423, and that didn't make it this year. So I was a little upset about that one. Transitioning from the bills that didn't make it, the bills that, that we enjoyed, maybe we have like one bill that was, we weren't super a fan of that people need to watch out for. I feel like there was a couple of those this year. I don't know, Abdilia, did you want to talk about one in particular?
Yeah, sure. I can talk about House Bill 991, the Voter Purge Act. It really created a lot of additional barriers to voting and voter registration. And you hear that, and your mind might not automatically jump to how does this affect voters who have disabilities? But what it does is it requires people to produce additional documents to prove their citizenship when they register to vote. And as folks might know, those aren't easily accessible for a lot of folks living with disabilities, right? So whether it's a birth certificate or a passport, a lot of low-income people can't afford I believe it's only 40% of Americans own a passport because it's $160 to apply for one the first time. So that unfortunately did pass. The good thing about that is that it doesn't take effect until next year, so it will not interfere with your ability to vote for this election. But as soon as the governor did sign that into law last week, we did file litigation to stop that law from taking effect. So that is going to be making its way through the legal system as that progresses.
I appreciate you bringing that up. I feel like it's also worth mentioning that it wasn't just about like restrictions, but it also talked about, methods of identification that would no longer be accepted. Could you explain? Because I can't remember if this like personally, so I like student ID cards, those were no longer going to be acceptable forms of
Correct.
identification. Military ID, I had heard was no longer going to be accepted. Is that true?
Military ID is still accepted, if I remember correctly, but it did remove not just student IDs for showing your identity at the polls, but assisted living, retirement center community
Right.
IDs, which elderly folks who are in living in a assisted living facility uh, wouldn't be able to use that form of ID to confirm their identity at the polls. And in addition to that, it also mandated that all voting has to be done via hand paper ballot, which was already effect in Florida. However, what it did was it removed the ability for local election officials to use what was called a express vote machine,
Right.
which in counties like Palm Beach County was it's a machine that it still hand marks the ballot and it produces a paper trail. It's verifiable, but you're able to mark your options on the screen, and that is typically preserved for if a voter with a disability requests it. But that county in particular expanded it to all voters. Now, it'll still be available for people who require that assistance. But not everyone, the truth is that not everyone is comfortable telling a complete stranger that they need accommodations for their disability to exercise the right to vote. So that unfortunately was also included in the bill as well.
I appreciate you bringing that up because I know this is as we head into the midterms, and a lot of people are going to be having questions about what this looks like. I know that there's some conversations at the federal level for, changing to votes. I'm hoping maybe I can even convince you to come back to another conversation later. We were talking about maybe inviting our supervisor of elections just for local information, but in particular for people with disabilities, how and where and what they should be watching for, that kind of thing. So I appreciate you drawing attention to that. Laura, do you have one that
I'm gonna actually, I'm gonna piggyback on Abdillah because you stole my bill. No, I'm kidding. Abdillah does such great work in this space, and that's how we're acquainted. But I do think you kind of hit the nail on the head, Nicole. I think for at least DRF's focus as of right now is to make sure that people have the accessible information as to what's changing, when it's changing. So that's something we're going to be working hard on. The other thing I wanted to highlight that the bill um, does that, in aside from the ID requirements, which one of the stats they had around the ID requirements is that 98% of folks have real ID, and that's a little bit of a misnomer because it's people that have driver's license. It's not talking about our population, which a lot of folks don't. But in addition to that, one of the things is that if that the citizenship cannot be verified by records that are held at the DMV and then the normal ways that folks can register online, it's requiring paper registration, which we were able to get some floor questions around. Some members thankfully were able to have some floor questions, and our concern as the protection and advocacy agency around that is that paper forms are not accessible, particularly to blind and low vision voters, those with mobility issues, those that have trouble signing. And it was like, what's available for this, this requirement? And the answer was, well, the SOEs have processes in place, and they do somewhat, but none of those processes for this specific form are outlined. That's going to be a rulemaking process, so that is something to watch as well. And it just, again, as Avila said, people don't think of it as tying directly to disability, but disability, as you open the call with Nicole, touches everything, and our right to vote is fundamental. So,
No,
um,
I really I can't stress that enough. I feel like this is probably one of those that could do with a deeper dive later, because it's such a concern and probably I hope an unintended one, but it's definitely worth noting, the accessibility is an issue right now as a whole. Our state filed a lawsuit with 7 other states for, finding the 504 rule. They wanted to remove that final rule. And we're talking in particular, one of those things that the latest rule showed was accessibility, online accessibility, as we have our whole world online. We talk about voting, we talk about those kind of access issues. And for people with low vision, or if they're not able to use a touchscreen or any of those things, and we don't already meet those requirements, so to continue to chip away at what's already difficult to access, just I think is something worth that conversation. But I agree with you. I think that's something we need to talk about more. I was going to see if either Jim or JJ would like to go next to talk about. I see JJ's kind of prepping his statement, but didn't know if you're ready.
I know this bill was already mentioned, but it's such a bad bill. It deserves to be dragged again. Senate Bill 1098, would have required some people on Medicaid to work 80 hours a month in order to keep their Medicaid coverage. Now, that might sound okay, but it actually means more paperwork, more bureaucracy, and more people losing coverage who never should have. And if you're thinking, I'm entitled to Medicaid, so this won't affect me, think again. Medicaid unwinding wasn't supposed to kick eligible people off the waiver either. But it did. A lot of them. And bills like this trip up people like us all the time. So, if this bill ever passes, we'll get caught in it even though the bill's sponsor said people with permanent disabilities will be excluded. But how many of us still have to prove, over and over, that we haven't been miraculously cured? I know I do. So if I'm not considered permanently disabled, then who is? And on top of that, this will cost more to run than it'll save. It's a bad bill and I hope it never passes. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, JJ. I appreciate you talking about it. He's talking about the public assistance bill. But yeah, I agree with you. We both went up to kind of speak in opposition to that, and I'm grateful it didn't pass this session. So hopefully that will be the end of it. Jim, did you have a bill that you were not a huge fan of, maybe that passed this session?
You know, I mean, I understand and share many of the concerns here about the bills that passed, and I'm honestly I probably don't have anything to add to that, Nicole. I mean, there are things I wish they would have done. I wish that they would have passed a budget. And I wish, I'm hoping that they'll consider maybe including funding for both the wait list and to help shore up provider rates, because I believe that the workforce issues. So this would be, and we're actually well positioned for that because one chamber has funding for the wait list, the House. The Senate has funding for the for provider rates. So if you ask me, I think they ought to do both. Maybe they'll find a way to do both. I'm also hoping that while I understand that the House's decision to sweep the lion's share of that lump sum that's been building up in APD's budget, I would love to see more of those dollars invested back into serving people with IDD. Now, technically, and just because I basically grew up professionally as a budget guy, I understand those dollars are considered to be non-recurring, and it is very bad practice to use non-recurring dollars to fund recurring obligations. But given the size of that pot of money, they could really do a lot of good things for people. I really support the current director, Bob Astalis. He's trying to take people off of the waiting list so that there won't be these huge surpluses, hopefully moving forward. So I tip my hat to him for that. But even if he meets his goals, there's still going to be a substantial cohort of people who are still on a waiting list. And there are probably simple, relatively low-cost things that can be done to bring great relief to those families. So I guess I'm more concerned with some of the lost opportunities that I'm seeing. than anything else. And I'm not, the issue with the voting and all that, I don't follow that as closely. I tend to be kind of narrowly focused on disability issues. And on that particular bill, I'm very, very concerned with the impact that's going to have on people with disabilities and also their caregivers. Because a lot of the caregivers are under a lot of stress. They're not necessarily wealthy people or people who are going to have passports. I mean, I don't know a lot of the family members, at least that I've known over the years. They're not world travelers for the most part. So, hopefully there will be some kind of accommodation for that. But I'm just hoping we're going to have some good outcomes with the budget, and I hope that both chambers will choose to maybe look at what they're doing and try to mix and match, and instead of trading off with one another, maybe they'll buy each other's good positions is what I'm hoping happens.
My fingers are crossed. I feel like that's a good
Yeah.
segue into conversing or talking about the budget, but I wanted to also mention one that I was not a particular fan of that passed was House Bill 1001, Senate Bill 1134. That was the anti-DEI ban or anti-DEI legislation that basically prevented this local governments from funding or promoting DEI initiatives. And I really appreciate how Abdilia mentioned that people hear DEI and there's, definitely some negative connotations that are associated there, but they forget that there's usually an A at the end, and that's accessibility. DEI is also with people with disabilities. And if we're one of the only minority groups that I had a professor say that is always taking applications, then I have to hope that we continue to have fierce advocates like JJ and Laura that continue to fight to make sure that we have full inclusion for our people with disabilities. So I was really disappointed in that one. But I think this is a good moment to pivot to the budget because we are getting ready to gear up, hopefully, for budget conversations. And I also wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions if we had any. I have another 30 minutes left for this call, but I want to make sure we get some time for everybody to talk. We're looking at the budget now. And the House has published theirs, the Senate has published theirs, and obviously there's some key differences that need to be worked out. Um, I think I'm going to start with Laura. Can you tell me anything that you think families should be aware of or things that we should be advocating for in advance of, legislators heading back to Tallahassee and gearing up to talk about the budget?
Yeah, I think that just in general, and I'm speaking more as a person with a disability than my DRF hat at the moment. I think, you know, for me, it's we should always be we're always kind of there's not enough funding. We know that like Jim mentioned, provider rates and some of the we know the wait list is that or the what as the legislature would call it the free enrollment list is always an issue. And so I mean those are definitely two advocacy points. DRF is sometimes more or less connected to budget talks in itself as we are some other issues. But I always think that, when whether it's we're talking about policy or talking about budget, getting the concerns of individuals with disabilities is always important. And really for a lot of our services, it does come down to the dollars and cents, right? So it's important to know. And those processes are a little bit convoluted too. Where to look in the GAA and, so I think is something as in the work left to be done. I think for us as advocates, like maybe we can help demystify some of that for families with disability, people with disabilities and their family members. I think is kind of a gap that I see. But I would say, for those that are able, just definitely start with if you search the budget is in something called the General Appropriations Act, and if you search it, you can find out a lot of information about what the state's doing. Also, if you have a passion project, like take that to your legislature, and like advocate for the advocate with your story to then secure the funding. I guess is my kind of takeaway. And I think about the autism definition bill, and I know that didn't pass, Nicole, but like just your advocacy on that and I know it's not technically a budget issue because it didn't pass, but it would have been a budget issue, right? Like I mean, it would have greatly impacted the way like funding. But that's something that we feel very strongly and know very strongly like needs to be done. It's it, it's not necessarily as much as it comes down to dollars and cents. I guess what I'm trying to say. It also comes down to our advocacy, and we're the only people that can put the human face as family members, as people with disabilities, as those that work in the space to the legislature that behind the budget.
Yeah, I think it's
I felt
probably
like I was rambling a little bit, but
no, no, no. I was gonna say if you ever need something to help put you to sleep, you go into the House and the Senate site and you pull up that budget and try to read it. And if you don't have the experience or the education to like, what?
And I really do think that's a gap, and maybe something that we and those interested, if like can help kind of as things demystify it, because
Yeah.
truly, like I work in policy analysis. I know we're all like on this call in deep in this world, and we don't, it's difficult. So
No, I
but it
appreciate
does
you saying
matter
that.
so much.
I think that if there's anything to bold, underline, and highlight, it's what you said that we're the only ones that can put the human face on those numbers. Because if you look at it seriously, it's mind-numbing, and it affects everything. Everything is driven by the budget. So to have that personal understanding of what this impacts, who it impacts, and if you're the legislator, this is your constituent, and they can understand that personally. I feel like is you can't put a dollar figure on the person, right? So as they come in and they're talking to you, you're the constituent. So I appreciate you saying that.
I'll add one more thing real
yeah,
quick too. And I've heard JJ advocate from this as well. Is like sometimes in the reverse of what I just said, it when we're advocating, it does help to put things in those terms, like thinking of home and community-based services. Just the fact that like compared to institutionalization, I use home and community-based services. I know there are others on this call that do as well, and so it is cheaper. So, sometimes you do want to bring in that budget experience there, but I will let others weigh in, but that's kind of my take is really hone in on the advocacy piece of it as much as you're able.
no, thank you. I appreciate that. It's also, because a lot of people don't know how to get started. What do they do? How do they get involved? And maybe they're intimidated to take that first step. And we talk about your personal story and how important that is for legislators to understand. And I think that, it's important, like you said, to kind of craft or take that story and have it so you're advocating for a purpose. So you take, okay, this is the struggle that we've been having, and this is why we need a better definition of autism. Or this is why we need the right to repair our mobility devices, or why we need student elopement plans. So that to give some context for what we're talking about there. But yeah, thank you. Yeah, I don't know who wanted to go next for any kind of budget, conversations.
Nicole, one thing I want to just add real quick is that there are substantive proposals. All right, so there's a budget. But what will also be considered in the context of the budget are what's called a conforming bill, which is it's a bill. It's just a bill related to health care. And the only thing that makes it special is that the legislative leadership says they've determined that they need that bill to pass to conform Florida law to what they're passing in the budget. And there's also an implementing bill, which is a series of temporary changes to Florida law that is needed in order to implement specific provisions within the General Appropriations Act. And there are some fairly interesting provisions, I think, that people might want to be aware of, and maybe even want to weigh in on. One in particular that caught my eye because it's something that uh, I have long thought ought to be the case. And in the Senate, again, and mind you, I'm hoping that the Senate will consider tweaking some language that they put in the budget. And so specifically, it requires a group called the Social Services Estimating Conference to consider enrollment, utilization, whatnot for the managed care pilot program. And what's important about the Social Service Estimating Conference is that that is an official that's a group of people from the House, the Senate, the governor's office, and ACA also sits at that table, the Agency for Health Care Administration, the Medicaid agency. And for every Medicaid program, whatever they tell the legislature are the projected expenditures, that becomes kind of an automatic in the House and Senate budget. So that when there are changes in the amount of utilization, if there's caseload increase, it kind of automatically gets folded into the budget. You know, the legislature's not having to make a decision and they're not fighting over it. Both chambers typically adopt it. A notable exception to that is our home and community-based services waiver. So again, and any of you who've heard me do my spiel on the budget in other forums have heard me say that if they're going to do that for the managed care pilot, they ought to also do it for the iBudget waiver, because that is not the estimating conference. Their estimate for the iBudget is whatever the legislature appropriates. And there have been times, and what that has resulted in has been those gargantuan surpluses that creates a lot of dissatisfaction in the stakeholder community, probably causes people in the legislature to question how effectively APD is implementing the iBudget. But as a former director who had the opposite, when the legislature was not recognizing increased cost, increased utilization, because mind you, you've got the same people in the iBudget and they just keep getting older. Their caregivers keep getting older. Their needs increase. Their services increase because while a waiver is not an entitlement, once you're enrolled in that waiver, you are entitled to medically necessary services. And if those increase, the state has no choice but to pick those up and fund them. And so for any of you old timers, you can remember whenever we had these massive deficits. And these deficits caused major policy changes that were harmful to people and all kinds of, I mean, it just, if you were to take this group and you had them actually looking at what's happening in the real world, we would have avoided both extremes. And I think we would have avoided a lot of the problems that we've seen. So I know this is highly technical and it's probably very difficult to understand, and I don't want to hog this conversation going into it. I'd be happy to follow up maybe in another venue
No, I think that would
and
be
and
great.
and explain this more thoroughly. But I believe if they would take that up and consider it, it would really be a major long-term improvement, both for the managed care pilot and for the iBudget waiver, and it would put both programs on a level playing field. There's one other thing in the House version of the conforming bill, um, and this directs DCF to establish a program that would help individuals with disabilities obtain Medicaid. Now, it also has some very prescriptive language about a nonprofit that would get the contract to do that. I don't know if they had someone in mind, but um, I at least like the spirit of that because, and hopefully part of what this effort would be to never again experience the kind of issues that we did during the redetermination when people with disabilities were getting kicked off the waiver. And the real shame of that is we know that 99.9% of the time, if a person with IDD gets kicked off the waiver, it's an error. We know that. I mean, people don't all of a sudden win the lottery. Now there are, I mean, there circumstances don't change like that, and especially since we've got the working people uh, program in place, it just doesn't happen. And I just know from my time being the APD director and just talking to family members, uh, a lot of the people I know, they would quit their jobs before they would lose eligibility for those benefits because they couldn't survive without them. And it just doesn't have, it never happens that people, so if they just took I just think that this could be a very positive thing if it's also if it includes some effort to make sure that some of these errors that we've seen in the past uh, don't happen moving forward. So I would urge people to pay attention to that because some of these bills, the policies in them are are very, very impactful.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I think this is one of those things I really wanted to drill down on for people who aren't familiar with, the managed care pilot that expanded pretty quickly last year. And we talk about access to our iBudget waiver, the Home Community-Based Services waiver program in our state. So I appreciate you bringing that up. JJ, I didn't know if you had something to add for the budget.
I know this part of the budget has just been mentioned, but I'd like to ask everyone to reach out to your state representative and your state senator and ask them to support item 254, which is the direct support provider rate increases, and section 71 for the workforce recruitment and expansion funding in the APD budget. That's how we get more caregivers in the field and keep the good ones. It'll take 2 minutes. It makes
Sorry.
If anyone wants to make more calls, I've got a list of legislators' names and numbers you can have. Thank you.
Thanks, JJ. Yeah, no, if you could get me that list, I'll post it with the notes and we'll definitely share it on our socials. Abdilia, did you have anything for the budget that you would like to add?
Yeah, first I'll say y'all are a lot nicer than I am because my first piece of advice is for them to do their jobs. A lot of folks don't know this, but the one constitutionally required thing that the legislature must do during session is pass a budget. And they had one job and they did not do it. So I would give them an F if I were their teacher. However, beyond that, uh, what I always the first thing that always comes to my head is pushing for additional funds for Medicaid. It's a lifeline for a lot of people. low income disabilities, living without disabilities. It's crucial. And we've already seen at the federal level the largest cuts to Medicaid since it was started in the 60s. We're talking about a country that in the same bill provided ICE with more money than some countries give to their entire militaries, right? So the money is there. We have the resources, but a budget is a statement of values. And right now, our values are out of whack with the needs of everyday people. Aside of that, uh, I'll raise up what Laura said. If there is an issue that's near to your heart or that you're affected by, contact your legislator about it. Whether it was the autism definition bill that was mentioned, or I remember reading several articles where JJ was mentioned advocating for the right to repair bill for motor wheelchairs. Uh, that's how things really pick up steam, because a lot of times lawmakers just don't even know an issue exists until someone who's affected by it brings it to their attention. And uh, beyond having a state bill filed, I believe the right to repair bill for motor wheelchairs was recently introduced in Congress for the federal level. So these kinds of ideas trickle upwards in government. Something can start as low as even a county program that makes its way to the state, and then it can even make its way to the federal government. So that's how a lot of change is done, is getting into contact with your representatives at whatever level. It can be state, county, city, and just having that conversation, putting a face to the issue, and letting them know this is something that we need to fix, and it can be fixed, whether it's with a law or just allocating enough money for this program to solve the problem.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I know that in case anyone is not familiar, there is a current Medicaid expansion effort in our state, and I can share the links for that in the notes. So please, if that is at all an interest area for you, take a look at the link and plug in there because I believe that's going to be a ballot initiative, right, for the next session. Um, there's, you know, I was hoping as we talked about this, because budget can be something, one of those things that either you get really excited about or it's going to be something that helps everyone go to sleep right now. So I was trying to figure what is the way that we can balance the conversation to keep engagement. But I really like how Laura said that this is personal for us and to take every place that budget affects you. And so maybe you're not familiar with how these budgets affect you, and that's where maybe our conversations can be better because for example, I know there's been a lot of discussion around the ESC programs in the Department of Education funding and how that trickles down from the federal level to our state, and how there are conversations again to cut funding to our special education programs, teachers not getting the pay increases that they needed. So as we have these conversations about things that might personally affect you, or family members, we talked about Medicaid expansion or access, and we talk about caregiver supports, because a lot of our disability population is aging as well as our caregivers. And so I think, Florida ranks, I want to say at the bottom of our nation for caregiver supports. And, it just could be the scope of almost anything that you can imagine when you talk about caregiver supports. And that's not just for intellectual developmental disabilities, that's all disabilities, you know? So if you have a parent or a cousin or, a grandparent that's living with you, and you consider what this could possibly mean for you personally, it affects everybody. So I want to say that we're getting towards the end of the time now, and I wanted to see if anyone had any specific questions for the panelists. I feel like we could probably give that a couple of minutes and then we could wrap up. So if you had a question, if you wanted to raise your hand, we'll go ahead and open the floor up for a couple of questions. I'll give that a second and we'll see if we have anyone on the call that maybe has a question. Awesome. Yeah. Let me see here. We got someone who just came back into the waiting. Hold on. But here we go. Oh, and I wanted to say, Jim, that my friend Jackie says that she really wonders how CDC Plus might be affected. So she appreciated what you said when you were talking about the, estimating conference. So wanted to make sure you were aware of that comment. Anybody else have any questions or comments for the panelists? No? I'm going to give it one more minute. And if
I
not,
do.
oh, yay! Yay, Rebecca.
Hi,
Yay.
it's Alison.
I'm sorry. Hi, Allison.
Hi. I couldn't figure out how to raise the hand. I couldn't put it in the chat, so it was about. I'm just wondering how managed care, because I mean, after all these years of ignoring APD for the estimating conference, how they managed to just slide in so easily, and if this is, I mean, they haven't even got figures yet for um, any solid data, and supposedly it's going to be later this year that they start getting real data on it. So I just wonder how they did it, because we'd like to do that too, whatever they did.
Jim, did
Let
you
me
have anything?
let me
Yeah.
yeah. First off, this is proposed language in the Senate
Yeah.
budget, so it hasn't passed yet. The other part of the question, I think, would be better directed at members in the Senate. I mean, clearly, I mean, it in most any other context, this would just be highly, highly technical kind of budgeteer. Budgeteers being budgeteers, they like to, and again, I'm speaking as a former budgeteer myself. We love, we're data driven. And we would like to see, and for something like Medicaid, where you have an entitlement, where you're having to, it's not like a traditional grant program. In a grant program, say the legislature appropriates $1 million, you give, say 100,000 each to 10 different nonprofits. You tell them to do well, and so in a grant program, you can precisely control what gets spent. In Medicaid, that's not the case, because what you're going to spend in Medicaid is a function of who shows up, what they use, and then how much that costs. And so it's a little more complicated than that. And so at least for me, I don't necessarily criticize that they want to take that approach with managed care, because I think that's the right way to do this for Medicaid. However, the criticism is to not do it for the I budget, because the I budget is not a grant program. It's not the old, I mean, and I'm going to date myself here, but when I first did the budgets for the DD programs, it was almost 100% state funded, and it was a series of grants. And if the legislature appropriated 200 million, that's what got spent, because that's all that got contracted. And when they ran out of money, they ran out of money. You can't do that with the I budget. So your point's well taken. I think they've been concerned that if they put the I budget into the estimating conference, it's going to all of a sudden take on a life of its own, and it's going to kind of be the snowball rolling down the hill. The problem is that the reality is that that's already the situation. And again, I'll have to go back to some of the history of this. Whenever the waiver was first adopted and first implemented in Florida, the state had a lot of tools back then to precisely control how much got spent through that waiver. In essence, they were able to manage it largely like they had managed the old grant and aid program, just with the advantage of drawing in all these federal dollars, so that you had more dollars available for services. That was a good thing. But over the years, there's case law, there have been decisions made at the legislative level that that's no longer the case, and that the I budget today, it functions much like any other Medicaid program. The only thing that makes it different is that it's a waiver program and that you can have a waiting list. Okay, and that's a huge difference between the traditional Medicaid programs, where if a person shows up, they're eligible, they have to get enrolled. Not the case with iBudget. However, you show up, and the state of Florida says we're going to enroll you. Once you're enrolled, if your needs change over time, the state of Florida has committed to making sure that the funding and the services keep up with those changes in need. And that's a huge difference from when this program was adopted, because I was there on the appropriations staff when this happened. And I can tell you the mindset then was we can control that waiver by just, A, the number of people we enroll, but B, we can put in place certain kind of artificial mechanisms that allow the state to precisely control what gets spent. Those tools are no longer available, and it puts that agency in a bad spot. And when the agency, and whether you love them or you hate them, when the agency gets put in a bad spot, it puts all of us in a bad spot. And so I fully agree that I think both programs need to go into the estimating conference because they're both Medicaid programs, and the needs and the expenditures are going to change over time. And there's nothing that state agencies or even the legislature can do about that, basically given the legal context within which they operate.
I think that we probably could maybe do that conversation. I appreciate Jim saying, yeah, I'll come back. We'll talk about it. So now you've opened the door. So we have to have the conversation. But I wanted to say that Rebecca had a question. So we'll probably have that as our last question of the evening. And then Rebecca.
Yes, hi. I was just wondering, so for example, a couple of the bills that JJ mentioned, I have a strong interest in them, and they didn't pass this time. So other than reaching out to our local legislature and maybe the people that sponsored that legislature this session, is there anything else we can be doing to try and get it back on the radar as soon as possible and not lose the momentum we've built up this session?
That's a good question. And kind of goes towards how I was hoping families would engage, kind of over the summer. Laura, do you have any good advice for Rebecca about making sure we keep those issues forefront for our legislators?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes, and so in addition to contacting the legislature itself, and meeting with your representatives in district, and take something like the autism bill or the right to repair bill that was, we all we all want, I think it really just comes down to, and it's not a quick kind of solution, but it comes down to that continuing the grassroots advocacy, continuing conversations like this, making sure that we as a community, and I know you and I have had conversations extensively about this, Nicole, are kind of pulling it. We can have different approaches, we can have different ideals, but we're pulling in the same direction, because I think, just speaking as a person with a disability, the community itself is so fractured, and that works to our detriment. So I think that building those strong connections with each other, while it might not be the quickest path, I think it is the thing that we do, other than advocate towards the legislature, make sure that we are in, kind of communion with each other, so that when we do have those opportunities, whether they be session, whether they be off season, that we are kind of just hitting them with this wave of advocacy. We've seen that work for things like the law enforcement training bill. Nicole, I say it again and again, but the fact that you were able to influence the autism bill to even get filed. Like that is, as much as like that isn't a, it didn't go where we wanted it to go. That is a victory. That's a conversation that needs to be happened. So I guess my advice, and I'm curious as to others as well, is that, you know, sometimes that's the win. Sometimes it's the conversations that we can start. The momentum that we have is the wave that we create in this kind of grassroots. Um,
I agree. No, I agree wholeheartedly. Laura and I have
Yeah,
talked a
thank
lot
you.
about or at least from my viewpoint, there seems to be a lot of fracturing overall in our world. I think a lot of people are kind of battle fatigued from advocacy efforts. There's just been a lot to kind of take in, a lot to be involved with. So many times we have to, can you make a quick phone call? Can you do a quick email? And it's quick, it happens, and it's exhausting. And especially for people with disabilities, with their families, we're already kind of in a battle mode that is, exhausting. So to add one more thing feels insurmountable at times. And I think to Laura's point, when we talk about repairing those bridges amongst our, communities, amongst our nonprofits, amongst our agencies, our partners, like, over at the ACLU and Disability Rights Florida, they have different missions, but we all serve for the same community. We all, I think, fundamentally want those same things. What connects us is more than what divides us, right? So taking that mentality and building that community kind of kind of locking arms. I loved when we talked about historically when we talk about the celebration of the 504 sit-in, like we just talked about that at the beginning of this call, and how the Black Panthers came in and brought food to the people who were sitting in. This was a huge thing historically, how civil rights and disability rights, we marched together. So that goes to that broader message of kind of being one voice, for lack of better term. I know that we're past our time. I didn't know if anybody, like the panelists, had one more thing they wanted to say, and then we'll say thank you to everybody for taking so much time on a Wednesday evening, for being with us. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. JJ, did you have something you wanted to say before we kind of logged off? I'm going to go around and say for all the panelists.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Avdilia, did you have any last thoughts?
You said it perfectly, Nicole, in your closing. Disability rights are civil rights. Here at the ACLU, we'll continue to push forward and to promote and defend those rights. But I'm looking forward to being more plugged into that fight here in Florida.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Jim, did you have any final thoughts?
Um, well, I think there's been a lot of good information. I guess one thing I would urge people is make sure you're educated on the issues and make sure that you're always speaking in terms of facts. It's real easy to become emotional because these issues are very personal for us. But don't let that overwhelm and marginalize yourself by by not being knowledgeable about the topic. The other thing I would say is uh, uh, just don't give up. I mean, understand that the process is designed to move slowly and incrementally. And then, especially for those of you who have been in this like I have for decades, occasionally look back and see where we are today versus 10 years ago and 20 years ago. And that should give you some strength to carry on because the world's not perfect today, but it's a whole lot better at least our corner of the world is a whole lot better than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So keep the faith.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. How about you, Laura?
I think I've kind of exhausted my thoughts, or we have a lot of thoughts. I will say, just kind of as a lot, let's keep having conversations like this, because I know there are a lot of other thoughts. And DRF is gonna look to do some session post session planning, and definitely anybody on this call, anybody that is in the community that wants to kind of come together and build those bridges, let's do it. But other than that, thank you for having me, Nicole. Thank you for putting this together. We need more venues like this. So I really appreciate you.
Oh no, thank you. I can't tell you how much each of the like you guys, thank you so very much for taking time, to spend with us this evening. We didn't have a ton of people on the call with us, but like I said, we're recording. We're going to post this on the YouTube channel. We will be sharing it everywhere, and there will definitely be more Zooms to come. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope you have a fantastic evening, and I look forward to seeing all of you, hopefully in person, here very soon. So have a great evening, everybody.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Thank you for
guys.
having me.
Thank
Thanks so
Bye.
you.
much.
Thank you.